And let me just give a quick introduction to Clare. So Clare, for the last 8 years, Clare Appavoo has, for the last 8 years, been the executive director of CRKN, a major consortia in Canada. I like to say that the CRL is a U.S.-based consortia, but not a U.S. consortia. We actually have a very strong presence in Canada. That's very important to CRL and understanding CRL. And so CRKN is just a really important partner. So CRKN has 76 members, does lots of major license negotiations and e-resources procurement on behalf of their member libraries. Has done that for a number of years. But more recently, CRKN has taken on Canadiana.org, so a massive cultural heritage archival digital resource, and has been making that available open access. And so in that way, CRKN is becoming more and more like CRL in that way. So delighted to have Clare with us today. Really happy to have Mike Furlough, the executive director of HathiTrust, where he's been leading Hathi for about 6 years. Before that, Mike was an AUL at Penn State, and before that, head of digital scholarship at UVA. Done a lot of work on library as publisher, library as digital publisher, and so delighted to have Mike here again today. By way of introduction, before, I normally wouldn't say this because it should be irrelevant, but since we're talking about trust networks and relationships, I will say that I really admire HathiTrust and CRKN, as I see them as key partners for CRL. Mike and Clare have been incredibly generous in a coaching and mentoring role for me as I settle in at CRL, and I really like them both. So that should be irrelevant in terms of business, but I actually like them, and so make those trust networks make that visible. So with that, I'll turn it over to Clare and then over to Mike. But thank you for being here both.
Great. Thank you very much, Greg, for that kind introduction. If I can, I would first start by respectfully acknowledging that the CRKN offices in which I'm normally working are located on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I think you've done a pretty good job of introducing CRKN, but I will situate us a little bit before I respond to some of Roger's comments by just, and apologies to those of you who are very familiar with our organization already, just give a little bit of a high-level overview of CRKN. So we are a member-driven organization, and we are primarily academic libraries with 81 members that include 76 academic, research, and innovative teaching-focused institutions, 2 national libraries, and Canada's largest public library system as well. We also have 2 associate members who participate in our heritage programs. Our mission at CRKN is to advance interconnected, sustainable access to the world's research and to Canada's documentary heritage content. It was interesting, Roger spent quite a lot of time talking about governance, and I will say CRKN is governed by a board of directors and by several purpose-driven committees that oversee our programs, as well as ad hoc working groups that oversee particular projects. One of the things that I think has been very successful for us in creating a really effective board and governance model at CRKN is that our chair of the CRKN board is a university president. And that's within our bylaws that should be the case. So we get a little of that really strategic perspective from our broader community that we're serving. CRKN is funded via membership contributions and membership fees, and we also get some additional revenue through various cost recovery services for digitization and preservation. So where we started at CRKN, we actually did not start in the print era. We were formed in 1999 initially as the Canadian National Site Licensing Project to respond to a Canada Foundation for Innovation grant. And we ended up with two, over the course of time, two grants for digital content. One was for, the initial one was for STM content, and then later for humanities and social sciences content. And the thinking behind those grants initially was to position and to really acknowledge that digital content is part of that bridge, that is actual infrastructure. It's part of research infrastructure. So after those initial funding periods, we have now been in for the last 5 years. 100% licenses are 100% funded by the members, so we have straight pass-through fees for the licensed content. We are also, we do license $130 million Canadian dollars a year worth of content, and our operations are fully funded through our membership fees. So as Greg mentioned, we did in 2018 merge with the organization that was known as Canadiana.org, and the rationale behind that merger was that we had a shared membership, that we both had mandates that supported the research community, although Canadiana also had a more expanded mandate to serve a broader public as well. And as stated by one of our members, the opportunity was for the library community to spin in rather than spin off. So I really appreciate Roger's comments around that need to, rather than form yet another organization, actually to bring a couple of organizations together to be able to address needs in a common way. We took on responsibility at CRKN through that merger for digitization of and access to preservation of Canadian heritage content. And we have two substantial collections. The Canadiana online collection is 19 million pages, and the Heritage Connection that was developed in partnership with Library and Archives Canada is 41 million pages of content. So it's a substantial expansion of our activities at CRKN when we went through this merger. So in doing that, we did need to evolve our governance and our mandate in order to support that merger. We have recently gone through a significant strategic planning exercise, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We opened and expanded our membership types and for associate members to be able to include the participation and the perspective of the broader GLAM community, who really are very much invested in the Canadiana activities and content. And we really did need to undertake a review of our strategy and our mission as we had this growing portfolio of activities. So what does it mean for us to move? You know what, I'm gonna talk a little bit about that strategic planning first, if I may. So we really did think about strategic planning. Before we started that exercise, we really reflected on what that might involve. So as you all know, strategic planning can be very stale. If we use the same approach to strategic planning, we can really come up with very similar results and not really be particularly innovative. And I think at CRKN, when we started the process in 2018, we really undertook a significant exercise with a massive outreach to our members and the broader stakeholder community. And it was designed from the outset to be open to all possibilities rather than to be building a strategy that was based on our current approaches. We went into the membership consultation phase with really an openness to all the perspectives and a willingness to be surprised by the ideas of our members. And we were told really, and this was exciting when it came back, and it was surprising, was when our members came back to us and said, be bold, be innovative, and we are ready for you at CRKN to be transformative. And it really was an iteration of the value that members see in CRKN, and there was a really continued statement of that value, and in fact a statement that the value of the organization has in fact increased over time. And it's not that we haven't at CRKN been through that questioning phase, because we very much have. We've had an external review and had a really very much of a reflection, a self-reflection on, are we still bringing value to members? So this exercise and following on the heels of the merger really did allow us to take that next step in our thinking. The other thing we were able to do was to get to the core of our purpose as an organization, and to be able to set strategic goals that our team, our board, and our members will be able to know off the top of their head. And those are three very key pillars: transform scholarly communications, develop and foster partnerships, and undertake collaborative advocacy. And those are not small goals. They're definitely stretch goals, and they are visionary. But we are working towards those goals. So I think, what does it mean for us to scale at CRKN? And really coming back to Roger's question about scale, what does it mean to our members? Well, and especially when we were thinking about the merger, we were really under the impression and came into this thinking about the fact that we can do more together than we could do apart. So the sum of our two organizations, CRKN and Canadiana, is actually bigger than the two separate parts in terms of our effective potential. And we also were better able to avoid a duplication of effort, and are able to take very much a national approach to finding solutions. We continue to be and provide a significant component of research infrastructure with the commercial content licensing program. And we are very much involved in evolving partnerships and collaborations. They are at the core of what we do. We are involved in partnerships with other organizations like Erudit, Library and Archives Canada, the National Heritage Digitization Strategy, CARL, the Centre for Research Libraries, JSTOR, and others. And our member-driven innovations are evolved and come out of these partnerships that we're involved in. For example, our Erudit partnership has led to the development, together with Erudit's partnership with PKP, to the development of the Coalition Publica. ORCID Canada and a Data Site Canada consortium have also evolved out of these partnerships. So how do we stay in sync? And I think that was a really great comment, Roger, that we do need to stay in sync with the changes in objectives and the broader context in which we operate and in which our members are operating. And how do we do that? Well, we definitely at CRKN see the shift from subscription-based access to content towards open research available on state-of-the-art infrastructure as very much at the core of our activities. And I think rather than pivot to new ways of adding value, our strategic approaches are in many ways reinforcing the very reason that CRKN exists. As stated by one of our board members, the transformation of scholarly communication is in our CRKN's destiny, and what we have been working towards for the past 15 years is very much that destiny. This is not a reimagining of our role. It is rather an arrival at exactly the reason that CRCam was created in the first place. In this transition to open access, our approach focuses on our vision, our mission, and our principles, and we've articulated a strategic project that is anchored in transparency and engagement with members and stakeholders that will allow us to move towards open access and to create those stages of readiness for open access. As we look towards the future, we at CRKN see value in the activities of digitization, preservation, and access. We want to work in partnership with other organizations like CRL to be able to scale within collaborative vehicles. We definitely are way beyond a buying club. We've never seen ourselves simply as a buying club at CRKN. We are a national voice, a community of practice, and the national collective negotiating body for research content for academic libraries in Canada. And the initiatives, projects, initiatives, tools, and services that we offer are intended to extend capacity at our membership institutions and to support their strategic approaches in transforming scholarly communication through multiple pathways, not only one. And mainly our collaboration partners are our members. We are continually impressed with their agility, their innovative approaches, and their support for projects that benefit the whole. I think we're very fortunate in Canada to work in a very much a collaborative context. And we continue to work towards shared preservation in the CRKN context. That's very much about digital preservation of digital heritage and commercial content, both. So I think I'll pause or stop there and Greg, pass it back to you, and hopefully I've kept within a fair amount of my time frame there.
Thank you so much, Claire. That was wonderful. I'm just going to hand it right over to Mike.
Okay, great. Thanks, Greg. Can you hear me okay on this?
Yeah, it's perfect. Thank you.
Great. So, Greg, first, thanks to you and thanks to all the CRL team for putting this together and the opportunity to take part in this. I have been looking at the calendar the past several weeks and thinking about what was I going to be doing today before the pandemic struck. And today I was going to be in Chicago and see all of you, and it's unfortunate I can't do that. I want to thank Roger for his comments today as well. I really appreciate the blog post you wrote a year ago, and I've reflected on it many times. And I'm especially thankful to be able to meet Claire this afternoon. So I have a few points I'd like to make over the next several minutes, and they will extend a little bit and maybe reiterate in slightly different ways some of the issues that Roger was bringing up. But I hope they'll add something new to this as well. The first one is that we should absolutely be looking at our collaborative vehicles as modes to create long-term value and address long-term needs, and not only on the shorter term. And I'll talk a little bit about how HathiTrust does that, or I think we do that. But the next couple of years are going to be fairly precarious for collaborative vehicles, even those that are delivering value, I think. And longer-term investments can be very challenging to justify without immediate term returns. And so I think we need to think a little bit about what the risks are in that. It is inevitable that we're going to be looking at situations where it's necessary for more partnerships and greater alignment among our organizations, and possibly mergers, consolidations, or sunsetting. But there are some questions I'd like for us to be thinking about as we work through that, and I'll pose those towards the end. So for HathiTrust, I would paraphrase our mission as being here to support member libraries in their ability to transform how they provide long-term, durable access to the scholarly record. That's not just about library management and how libraries manage materials. It's about helping them and helping individuals catalyze research, teaching, and learning. We were consciously designed as a membership-driven vehicle for collective investment in that mission of long-term, durable access. We began with about 24 members, and now it's 150 members that support over 200 campuses around the world. Most of them are in the United States. We grew out of the work that an existing consortium was doing, the Big Ten, as they developed their response and their needs to support preservation after mass digitization began. Right? It was it's once in a century, if even that long, opportunity to transform how collections would be accessed in the future through mass digitization. And as much work as the Big Ten could put into it, they understood that the potential was bigger and they could gain more scale and more value by partnering with others engaged in this. And so the University of California came along, and then many others. Through that process, the governance model evolved so that we have one today that recognizes the founding members who capitalized the startup as well as the rest of the membership who has come along in years succeeding. So our board includes both representatives from our founding members as well as are elected from the membership. The base of what we do is preservation with access, and the aggregation of this collection of now over 9 million titles and about 17 million volumes has given us the ability to address, as I always say, larger problems that are really sticky for individuals. Text and data mining across large corpora material, shared print across larger networks, or copyright indeterminacy and determining copyright status. As Roger pointed out in a blog post earlier this week, the long-term investment in mass digitization and preservation and access has shown its true value in this current pandemic. Here, among us at HathiTrust, we've been able to bring access back to libraries in an emergency situation at a very large scale, supporting over 160 libraries when they have had to close and have not been able to provide access to their physical collections. So for me, that is really what durable access is all about. But thinking about some other points that Roger has made about the difference between a trust organization and a product organization, I recognize that tension because I feel that HathiTrust is a little bit of both of those, because the preservation element is very much about building the trust in the long term, but the need to provide service is very much a short-term, immediate-term need, and there are user expectations and across a wide spectrum of what access and discovery should look like. Working in a preservation organization over the last 6 years, I've really observed the tension between that longer-term thinking, that need for longer-term trust and value, and the short-term benefit. On my most cynical days, I have said things like, nobody wants to pay for preservation, right? All we care about is access. It's the right kind of short-term benefit that people are looking for in order to help us build what we're doing here. And I don't mean it to be that cynical. I do think it's actually challenging to put a value on long-term preservation. It's highly valued conceptually. It's very hard to value in dollars. We're much more attuned to putting dollar signs or pound signs or euro signs on access. We're conditioned to do through purchasing, acquisition, and licensing. We know that once upon a time, we tied preservation and access much more closely together through the collection building process. And of course, CRL began as a vehicle to bring scale to that linking of preservation and access. But licensing has taught us that we can decouple those activities and that we can create agents to handle parts of the preservation workflow while other parts handle the access workflow. We have Portico, we have clocks. To some extent, you have HathiTrust for this as well. So I think the question about how what that lesson's taught us in the current environment is a really interesting one. Does it mean that we now know, because we have to decouple these elements, these preservation and access issues, does it mean we're even more committed than we ever were to investing in those long-term preservation vehicles? Or does it make it just that much harder for us to understand how to value them and what short-term investment we need to make in them to sustain them over the long haul? And so I'm thinking about this a lot these days, of course, because of our unknown and ever-evolving financial situation. We were launched in the middle of the 2008 financial crisis. And the fact that we were successful at the time, I think, has helped to inspire the launch of other collective preservation organizations, what I've often referred to as the alphabet soup of preservation. Some of those have thrived and some of them have not succeeded, even though money was flowing in the early part of this decade or mid part of this decade. The current moment, I think, has made manifest to all of us the importance on our reliance on each other, right? The necessity of reliance on each other. It's never been clearer that our collective fates are deeply connected with each other. And that's true in our personal lives, and I think it's also true in higher education and in libraries as well. So going into the next several years, there are really important questions we have to ask ourselves as we look at how things start to shake out. Who is going to be able to invest in collective infrastructure and collective collections? Who is going to be able to benefit from those investments? And how do we manage those investments in ways that don't simply reinforce existing divisions in access or quality of education that we see right now? And I want to say right now, I'm raising those questions knowing that I do not have answers, right? And knowing that even some of the things we do right now are often pointed to as haves and have-nots. But I do want to raise those questions because I think they become more critical going into the next several years as we start to see a greater disparity in wealth among institutions as well as individuals. I think another way to think about the next couple of years is how we align and how we structure our vehicles for large collaboration. This is something that Roger was already talking about. One question that is obvious to ask is whether there are too many organizations to invest in. And if so, do we need to shut down or sunset some of these? Or can we instead look to mergers or consolidations of some of these, or simply stronger partnerships, what's necessary? And it's super reasonable to be asking these questions because we have in libraries been talking about the $20,000 problem ever since it was the $10,000 problem or the $5,000 problem. And, you know, when you're looking at your budgets right now in your libraries, you're looking at your memberships and you're looking at them thinking, which of these are bringing the value that I need right now? And which are the ones I can continue to invest in and believe in and support going forward? And it's very easy to look in this community, and I've thought about this a lot before, is like, why do I have to pay for this set of activity and you have to pay for this set of activity as well? And aren't there some service bureau approaches we could have to manage HR, financials, or something like that? But, you know, I think the need to align goes beyond reducing costs, right? It's about asking what we really need in this environment, what we really need in this community, what we really need to accomplish our goals. So if we're thinking over the next several years about what mergers or consolidations should happen, and I want to say, Greg, by the way, I wrote this before yesterday. You talked a little bit about CRL and NERL, and these issues kind of got floated a little bit there yesterday. But you know, if we're thinking about those mergers or consolidations, why are we doing that? Is it strictly to save money for the members? Are there really ways that those organizations can complement each other and allow them to better serve their constituency or broader constituency? Can that be used to harness more collective power or influence to accomplish the mission? And are there ways to do that short of a full merger that are actually more affordable and cost-effective? One issue that often gets raised here is organizational culture, and I think that is a term that means many different things in many different contexts, so I'll just point to one specific thing that I think really matters in this space, and that is, do the organizations conceptualize value and cost sharing in compatible ways, right? Everybody's a nonprofit, but not all nonprofits operate the same way, right? Two organizations can be nonprofits with preservation and access focused that can support higher education, that can declaim their commitment to higher education and supporting libraries, and they can still have fundamentally different approaches to this, right? How you choose to recover your costs from your members, what costs you pass along, whether you do it in a kind of a come one, come all membership model, or whether you do it in a la carte ways, those can mask deeper assumptions about and philosophy about the organization and your approaches. The last question I'll ask here, maybe not the last question, but almost the last, is do the organizations that are contemplating being brought together, that we think should come together, have the resources to make that an effective merger or consolidation? Organizations like ours already operate on relatively thin margins. We already accumulate technical debt if we're operating services or organizational debt. That sometimes makes it harder for us to innovate or expand. It goes to that agility issue that I think Roger was raising earlier. And I, in the same way that two debt-ridden, publicly traded companies would look very carefully at how they might merge and what that might mean for their bottom lines, I think it's important for not-for-profits to conceptualize what kinds of, if not financial debt, other modes of debt, other types of debt, other challenges they have in their organizational structures that they would be bringing to the table that would need to be dealt with, and whether or not those are actually can be dealt with compatibly between the two organizations or not. And that can be very simply a basis, really also very much basis of infrastructure and technical issues as well. So ultimately, the question that we should be asking is, what do we collectively need to accomplish our goals? We have a constellation of membership organizations in our world these days. I think we should start with a generous assumption that we've grown those to serve the needs that we have as a collective, but it hasn't been done consciously. It's not been done, it's been done more organically. And as needs and gaps become clear, new options pop up. So Sure. I don't believe we can do a planned economy, but I do think it's worth thinking about how, as a collective, we can bring more clarity to this collective network of services and functions that organizations like HathiTrust, that CRL, CRKN, Paul Neural, et cetera, all operate in order to help libraries achieve and accomplish that scale. So I have I shouldn't say hardly, I have no answers to those questions. I'm just speculating. That's the beautiful thing about being a respondent. I'm not even sure these are all the right questions, but I would definitely welcome the opportunity to hear some of the ones that you're asking this afternoon. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was fantastic. Thank you, Mike and Claire. And I think we're just, our timing is just impeccable. We have about 15 minutes to have a facilitated discussion with Roger and Claire, Mike, and myself, and Katherine Skinner will facilitate. I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and then we'll have a break, and then Kathy Price will talk about her new book. So Katherine, take it away. Well, good to see you again.
It's good to see everybody. And, first and foremost, all of the comments and talks that have been given so far today have been incredibly important, incredibly timely. And I just want to say thank you to you, Greg, for assembling this cluster of people to think about these things openly, honestly, and transparently at a really, really challenging moment. I've thought a lot about all of these issues. This is, what I eat, sleep, and breathe, in part because of the type of organization that I run. So with Educopia, what we focus on is cultivating community organizations and trying to help find where are the best pathways for some of these things. And so I want to start by asking you all to reflect on some of the paradox that is popping up in the conversation that you're having separately, and I want to hear you bring it together. And some of that comes around the comments that Roger started off with around agility versus, having more bulky governance, and how those two models often are counter to, if you take either one to the extreme, they're going to be counter to the other extreme's goodness. So in agility, you have fast movement. You also have less responsibility back to the community. And heavily governed groups might be less agile, but be very responsive to the needs of the community. One of the things that I wonder about, though, as we have carried forward in this conversation and talked a lot about consolidation and mergers, which are already happening, and I agree with all of you that that is part of the tool set we need to be looking at right now. But mergers and consolidation, by nature, move things towards more bureaucratic and bulkier structures, and that cuts down on agility. And so there's this very interesting set of not quite conflicts, but at least question marks around what the appropriate balance marks might be in a moment when we are going to need to be incredibly agile between having diversity of players, having agility, having good governance, and also having stability. So can y'all reflect a little bit maybe on that balance between those pieces?
So maybe I'll get us started, and I would like to just say, reflecting on the two fantastic responses that we heard, what a great reminder of just how much value our collaborations do provide. And I think I just want to really start by emphasizing that, because I do think that as we dive deeper and deeper into what's wrong, I don't want us to lose sight of I really want to thank my panelists for co-panelists for emphasizing that. I think that one of the challenges here is not to, my view anyway, would be not to assume that mergers are the right answer by any means. And I hope that I didn't suggest that that was automatically the right end state. I think mergers actually are quite often a mistake if they cause a misalignment, either on the governance or the mission, or in some of the other ways that that have already been pointed to. I also wouldn't say that a merger or acquisition, for that matter, necessarily needs to yield bulky governance. So I would challenge that assumption also. I think we've seen cases where actually two organizations have each been streamlined through a merger. But I do agree that we need to get, there is as we look for how to streamline some of the nature of our collaborations, these are the right questions to ask. So thank you, Catherine.
Claire or Greg, anything to add?
I have to say I was struggling a little bit in Roger's paper around that particular topic, and I'm not sure that I guess in our experience and these were, relatively speaking, somewhat small organizations that merged together. So I mean, we went at CRKN from a team of 8 to 15 when we first merged, and it's true that we've become 24 today, so we have definitely grown, but with purpose, because of increased activity. So yeah, I don't think I think it's possible to do activities without overburdening the governance structure and to still be agile. In fact, I would say, yeah, the first couple of years you're not as agile. You're just focused on how do we just make this work, right? But beyond that, then you get past that and you get into a more agile, hopefully, a more agile method of functioning. And yeah. I think I'll stop there.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, this is a really interesting point, and I can't easily reconcile this because these two, because I do see, as HathiTrust has grown, we have a greater diversity of institutions in the membership, and many of them have come to the party for reasons very different from the original institutions, and that can make it a little bit difficult at times when there's a party over here that really wants to take a fairly significant risk that has potentially great reward, but you've got to bring the rest of the membership along in understanding the potential value of that risk and make sure they understand the nature of that risk, right? That it's not how risky is that. But I sometimes think that for our organizations, the bigger challenge for agility isn't membership size so much as it is organizational and staff size. Small organizations certainly can move more quickly than large bureaucracies, but we live in a world where it's possible to make organizations so small that you're so busy working on the here and now that it's actually almost impossible to look that much farther out ahead and really rebuild or rethink a service approach. One of the ways we've tried to do that or balance that is have with our research center, where we have that co-hosted at other institutions with other parties, Stephen Downey and John Walsh primarily leading the development of the program around there. But then you have to manage that balance of how connected is that to the overall governance structure, and how aligned can you keep those activities, even if it's meant to be something more innovative and a little out of the usual path of things. So I guess I'm not sure it's only a matter of governance and agility. I do think there are other factors that come into play there that can actually help make those things a little more flexible. So.
Yeah, no, I've been watching that piece of what you're doing at HathiTrust with a lot of interest for a while. And, I remember back to MYPL and the challenges of having the Innovation Lab inside of even a, very forward-thinking, progressive, library. There still eventually became challenges in managing that relationship and allowing that kind of innovation to happen within this broader context, in the same way that Microsoft has a hard time having, innovations actually happen inside. And so it is this really interesting balance space that one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about, again, recognizing that part of the answer does need to be, part of the answer to this moment and this particular crisis, but also that higher ed was already going to be under strain over the course of the next 5 to 6 years, in part because of enrollment drops from the 2008 recession, now hitting in terms of those babies growing up into 18-year-olds, and other pressures that have been there. We knew that there's this moment of tightening that's happening, and I know mergers and acquisitions are going to be a piece of the spectrum of responses to that. But I also wonder what the role of those little innovations are and where we can expect those to continue to flourish, and how in a better aligned environment, which is part of what I think we're all struggling to find and to build in this maze of organizations and, projects and programs that are at different levels of maturity. How do we start to align that? And as we align it, how do we also make sure that the fringes continue to bubble up really interesting, innovative projects? Mm-hmm. I don't know that there was really a question embedded there, but I think I will turn it into a question by actually flipping it over to Greg and asking, with CRL, one of the things that I think CRL has represented is stability and long-term, healthy governance, healthy organizational model. What are some of the things that you've already learned from what you've inherited? And then where are some of the places where your energy is going to come in and bring some new directions to this?
Sure. Well, I think that just having this conversation, with this group of players on this group of topics, with this level of candor and frankness is in itself really, really helpful. And I often say, to get into the weeds a bit, I always say that anytime I charge like a standing committee, I always put in the charge like an annual sunsetting discussion, right? Is the committee still make sense? How do we tweak the charge, tweak the membership? That should just be something that's just embedded in any charge. And even though that's that's like microscopic, that's a micro scale, it's sort of what's good for that committee is sort of probably good for a consortium, right? To have a discussion every now and then. Is this the right governance structure? Are we on the right mission? Should we be sunsetting? Have those existential conversations. So what I'm thinking about at CRL is how can CRL take the resources that's represented in that consortia and do good in this ecosystem, right? Not good for CRL, but good for the ecosystem, right? Because that's our mission. And I think that what CRL's great strength is also its great weakness, right? What CRL has is it's been around for 70 years, so it's an enduring model, right? It's a really lasting model. So we have a bureaucracy, we have HR, we have a controller, we have all these administrative units that a bureaucracy would need, right? So we're able to operationalize big projects. In fact, we don't even need to operationalize projects; we just operationalize work, right? That's our scale. So when I look at CRL, I'm not sure, being an incubator or doing, experiments is going to be our value proposition. Our value proposition might be what kinds of innovative, what kinds of workflow efficiencies do member libraries need, or, do folks want to run on this platform, this platform, right? We've got this. I look at CRL almost as like an iPhone. We have this infrastructure. What apps do we want to run on that, right? Yeah. So that's what I'm thinking about in terms of us, in terms of CRL. How can CRL use what it has, its permanence, its structure, its bureaucracy, and do good for the overall community, but not try to duplicate what others might be able to do better, but also bring what we have to help the community? Anyway, I hope that was coherent.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So one of the other places that I'm really interested to hear you all talk as people who have been longtime leaders in the scholarly communication space and longtime thought leaders in the scholarly communication space is on the flip side of consolidation, which is that one of the things that we're already seeing is heavy marketing coming out of corporate environments that are, pushing new ways of helping the smaller societies, the libraries, et cetera, to have better access to collections and to publishing platforms in this moment. One of the things that we can expect is that there's going to be consolidation, and one of your colleagues, Roger at Ithaca SNR, of course, just wrote about this earlier this week as well. I think it was this week. what is the role of library consortia and library consortium members in anticipating some of the commercial consolidation that could happen right now in the scholarly communication environment, and not only preparing against it, but really using that long-term view to let us not make the short-term mistakes that we've made many times in the past when we're looking out for our own campuses or our own space in the 1 year versus looking across, what are we planting seeds for in the future? And Mike, I'd love to open that one with you if you're willing, in part because I see HathiTrust as one of the places where libraries have excelled at building tremendous collection that is not under commercial control. And so we can see the very big difference in accessibility and opportunity in this moment. How can we incentivize libraries to grab these moments, even when things are really tight, to do that same kind of work in other parts of scholarly communications?
I'm afraid you're going to throw that to me first because I haven't a clue here.
Somebody needs to know.
I think the reason I say so quickly I have not a clue is I was thinking a little bit about you were highlighting the fact that our collection is not under commercial control, right? Okay, that's great. That is true. And yet it's also a retrospective collection, right? It was consciously designed initially as a retrospective collection.
Right.
And we do not have anything quite like that on the same scale for prospective, and we're not especially well positioned to suddenly turn around and be that, right? And so, I think I'm going to come back to something Roger was picking up on, and that is that it's going to require a great deal of collective will of libraries individually, I think, to look for ways they can give up some of their control to work in more collective ways, in deeper ways through some organizations, whether it's ours or others, to help push back in that space. I mean, we're seeing an awful lot of good stuff happening at the institutional level with major publishers on pushing back against Elsevier, for example. It's happening in those disconnected ways. And I think the question I'm not quite sure how to ask is, or think about is, are there collaborative vehicles that have the same kind of power in that space in library land that the individual institutions seem to have in leveraging against, just say, I'm going to pick on Elsevier again. And maybe I'm just kind of hung up on that because it's the most visible one recently. It's also one where, though the contracts tend to be more institutional than collective as well. So that was a fairly babbling answer that does not offer a whole lot. I'm sorry, but
no, it's actually all reflection on this topic, I think, is really important. I'm also mindful, though, that I am taking us over time. So, Greg, I'm actually going to push this back over to you so that you can close us out for this session and get us towards Kathy.
Well, it's a great session, and like I said yesterday, I really see this as the beginning of a whole set of new conversations going forward. And so it's just been a delight to have Roger, Claire, Mike, and Catherine, all of you here for this conversation, and we'll continue it. But with that, we'll go to a break and pick up the conversation with Kathy Pice in a few minutes. So I'm going to go do a pour over coffee in the interim. So, all right, so everyone, go take a break, and
thanks so much.
We'll gather up shortly. All right, cheers. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, bye.
Bye-bye.